talents, there's pretty much no flexibility at all, but I'll just go through them really quickly. Void Tendrils in the first row is pretty much the only useful thing in PvE. Dominate Mind, possibly in like a dungeon scenario, like maybe challenge modes. But to be honest, I can't really see this being useful because then you can't do DPS while you are mind controlling a mob. So is it really worth it to lose that DPS versus mind controlling a mob for 4 seconds? I doubt it. For the second row, it's going to be Angelic Feather. In my opinion, Body and Soul is still viable and can be pretty useful. I see it as the healers are busy, and if you can shield yourself and get movement speed at the same time, it will help them out. But also, just be aware that if you have a Disc Priest and they try to shield you and you have shielded yourself previously, they're going to be annoyed with you because their shield will not work. For our third row, it's going to be Solace and Insanity. From Darkness Comes Light might become viable in future raids for high movement like cleave fights, but as of right now in Mogashan Vaults, it's Solace and Insanity for every single fight. And as of right now, never go with Mindbender. It is just complete trash and does shit damage. Row 4, your 60 row, Angelic Bulwark is the easiest and the best. Desperate Prayer is also viable. It's off the global cooldown. You can use it whenever you want. If you want, you can use Spectral Geist. It actually stops fixate abilities, but that is literally the only use for it, so I wouldn't recommend using it unless you're struggling with a mechanic like that. Fifth row, level 75. Twist of Fate is pretty much your go-to. Power Infusion might be good on short fights, but I haven't seen any fights yet that Power Infusion would overtake Twist of Fate. But just keep in mind that this does stack with Hero, so it does have potential to be the better option, like in a few weeks or a month or something when we're completely just plowing through the bosses in Mogashan Vaults and they're like less than 2 minutes. This might overtake Twist of Fate. And you're never going to take Divine Insight because this would potentially be useful on like cleave fights, but if it's a cleave fight, like I said earlier, you're going to be taking from Darkness Comes Light if/when it becomes viable. And then if you stack this on top of that, it becomes too busy and you can't keep up with all the procs that are happening, and you'll end up just wasting procs and doing less damage. I tested this a lot on beta and there was never one scenario where Divine Insight was more damage than the other two. And your sixth row, level 90. So these ones are actually a little bit flexible. Like Halo, you're always going to want to most likely take Halo in raids. If you position yourself properly, you can get actually a lot of damage out of Halo. Divine Star you might want to use for like a challenge mode scenario or even Cascade. It's just a little more easy to control, but overall Halo will give you the best numbers. Glyphs are pretty straightforward. Again, there's not much flexibility in your glyphs. I like to go with Mind Spike because in the opener it gives you like a slight DPS increase. This glyph will also increase your damage just like on ad fights, because if you have ads that are going to die really quickly, you can stack the Mind Spike glyph up and then you get instant Mind Blast. So it's actually an overall damage increase for certain fights. However, you could probably swap Mind Spike out for Vampiric Embrace. So Glyph of Vampiric Embrace just converts an additional 50% of the damage into healing. So essentially you're just healing for 100% of your damage rather than 50, but it reduces the duration by 5 seconds. So this has a potential to output more healing if you align this like with your burst, but it doesn't always work because sometimes you're bursting and there's no damage going out. So I wouldn't recommend like just wasting Vampiric Embrace when there's no damage going out. You're going to want to save that for higher damage parts. Other than that, you're going to go with Glyph of Inner Sanctum, which gives you a flat 6% reduction to spell damage. You're going to go with Glyph of Fade. It basically just gives you a 10% reduction from damage, so it turns your Fade into a defensive, which is really nice. And then your minor glyphs are just preference. I recommend you take Glyph of Confession so you can confess your sins. Stat priority number 1, you need 15% hit or spirit. Just keep in mind that if you're human, you get more spirit, so always reforge into spirit. Our second priority is going to be haste, specifically breakpoints. So the first one you're going to want to try to reach is 24.92%. This gives you an extra tick of Devouring Plague. 24.97 is your next one, so you'll get 2 extra ticks of Shadow Word Pain and Devouring Plague. And then potentially the last breakpoint is going to be 30.01%. This is most likely going to be more towards the end of the expansion. But yeah, the final breakpoint will give you 2 extra ticks of Vampiric Touch as well. So by the end, you'll have 2 extra ticks of every single one of your dots. So once you hit the first breakpoint or a breakpoint, you're going to just want to go with Crit next and then Mastery. So for the races, there's kind of a lot of information that's pretty straightforward. I'm not just going to talk about those because it's going to take a lot of time. So I'll just put a quick cheat sheet on screen here for you. And then I'll also do the same for the consumables. Here is the opener into the single target rotation. So at 2, you're going to pop your pre-pot into a halo, and then you're going to weave in your G91 Landshark right here into Mind Spike, and then Shadow Fiend. Now you're just going to get your dots rolling, so Shadow Word Pain, Vampiric Touch. Once your dots are up, you're going to consume your orbs with Devouring Plague, Mind Blast, and then now you're going to channel your Insanity as long as possible here. So now you're going to see at the last second there, I'm going to extend my channel. So now I got like 4 to 5 extra ticks of Insanity in. And then from here on out, it's just the basic single target rotation. This is the rotation and priority for up to 4 targets. So keep Halo on cooldown, keep Shadow Fiend on cooldown, and then you're going to want to maintain 100% uptime on all 4 targets with your Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch, and then Devouring Plague, Mind Blast, and then you're going to just cast Mind Seer on the main target to fill. You're going to find that you don't have a lot of time to channel Mind Seer with 4 targets, and that's completely normal. It's actually pretty hard to keep 100% uptime on 4 targets. 3 or less, it's a lot easier and you can actually channel Mind Seer, but yeah, just keep in mind that it is normal to not be able to channel Mind Seer very much with 4 targets. The idea is that you're just weaving your Devouring Plague and your Mind Blasts in between. Just follow the priority list. The higher priority is to keep your dots up, keep your cooldowns rolling. But don't forget to use your potions. Like if there's a part of a fight where you're multi-dotting, it's extremely powerful as a Shadow Priest. So depending on the fight, I'm not going to tell you to always use your potions on like multi-dot scenarios, because usually the go-to is to use your potion in execute phase because your Twist of Fate will be up the whole time. But it's going to be really strong because you're going to be able to snapshot all that extra intellect on all 4 targets, and your dots are just going to be hitting insanely hard. Our 5+ target rotation. Keep Halo on cooldown, keep Shadow Fiend on cooldown, and then channel Mind Seer. This is for 5+ targets that are going to die quickly and you won't get the full dot effect from your Shadow Word Pain. If there's 5 or more targets and they're going to live for the full duration of Shadow Word Pain, you can actually Shadow Word Pain all 5. You're going to get a lot more damage this way because, 1, your dots are obviously ticking while you're channeling Mind Seer, Halo, keeping your cooldowns rolling, and if your Shadow Word Pain is critting on any of those targets, which it likely will be, you're going to send Shadowy Apparitions. So you're going to have your Shadow Word Pain, Shadowy Apparitions damage, Halo damage, Shadow Fiend damage, and then on top of that you're channeling Mind Seer. But only do this if you know for sure that the targets are going to be up for the full duration of your Shadow Word Pain. Otherwise, if you're doing this and the targets aren't living long enough, say that you're only getting 2 or 3 ticks out of it, your damage is actually going to be less. So Movement as a Shadow Priest, basically you're just going to use your Angelic Feathers on yourself, and then you're going to cast your Shadow Word Pain. You can also use Shadow Word Death if the target is in execute range. Other than that, there's not really much you can do. If your Shadow Fiend comes off cooldown, you can use it while you're moving, and then same thing with Halo. The only time I wouldn't refresh Shadow Word Pain would be if you know you have a big snapshotted Shadow Word Pain and you don't want to override that dot. So just keep that in mind. If you know for sure, don't override it with a weaker dot. Shadow Priest cooldowns. So we are a utility hybrid spec. So how can we help the raid? Use your cooldowns. You got Life Grip, you have Dispersion, you have Vampiric Embrace. Then don't just use these like on cooldown. And I know that seems pretty obvious, but for example, Vampiric Embrace, I feel like people always want to just use it right off pole because that's when you're bursting. But lots of times right on the pole, there isn't going to be a lot of damage going out, so you're kind of just going to waste that. So just make sure you're using your cooldowns at the right time. So if a druid gives you Symbiosis, you get Tranquility. That is a huge raid cooldown, and that's a shit ton of healing. Mass Dispel, you can glyph this, and some fights, for example, like the Spirit Kings, you can actually dispel the shield. Void Shift, huge cooldown in oh shit situations. You can set up either a macro to target one of your tanks specifically, or you can just use a basic like focus macro that will target your focus and cast Void Shift. And then Fade as well. So with the Glyphs, your Fade becomes a damage reduction. Make sure you're using that when there's high damage, or even literally on cooldown. If you know like there's constant raid damage, just use it on cooldown. It's a short cooldown and you're going to get a lot of damage reduction, which means less healing, which means your healers use less mana, which means you kill the boss's ass. In my opinion, there is a few necessary add-ons, which I'm going to go through right now. So obviously, Deadly Boss Mods is your first one you need to get. GTFO is really good. It just basically screams at you when you're standing in something you shouldn't, which is pretty helpful when sometimes the ground is so cluttered and you can't see. Next one is going to be a dot tracker and a buff tracker, so you can use weak auras, tell me when. I actually have a video on tell me when, so if you want to check that out, it's on my channel. So in your dot tracker, you can actually track the damage of your dot as well, but in my opinion, it's not really necessary because you're going to know which buffs you're snapshotting and which buffs your dots have, so you're going to know when to refresh them and when to not override them. A cast bar that shows the ticks of your Mind Flay and Mind Flay Insanity. Reforged Light basically just streamlines your reforging, so you don't have to do all the math in your head or reforge over and over again until you get the perfect stats. So Reforged Light, and then just pick your preset for the Shadow Priest spec. I'm going to mention Damage Meter because I think that when you're doing content like other than raids, or you're just like practicing in dungeons, you should have one to just kind of like look at your damage, look at your abilities and stuff like that. But if you're trying to raid and you're still kind of new on the Shadow Priest, I'm not going to say I don't recommend it, but if you find that it's distracting you, just know that you don't need one because you need to just focus on doing your rotation properly and managing your buffs. You should have is a Dispersion and Cancel Aura Dispersion macro. So what this does is when you cast Dispersion, say it's on your number 1 keybind, you press it and you press your keybind again, it's going to cancel it. So say you have to soak like a raid mechanic, you can hit your keybind for Dispersion, and then as soon as the soak goes off, you can immediately hit it again, and then you're going to come out of Dispersion. So this way obviously you have more uptime on your damage. Either have a focus macro for your Void Shift and Silence, or have it set on specific targets. For example, right here I have my Void Shift set for one of our tanks in our raid group, and then for my interrupt here I have it at the Silence, or sorry, at the focus target. So what this one does is it casts Void Shift right at that person, as long as they're within range, and you don't have to change your target. Same with here. So with the focus macro, what you would do is you would set your focus target. So I have my focus set here as this training dummy, and say this is our main target. This is what we're focusing on right now. This ad doesn't need to be attacked at all. It just needs to be interrupted. So you're attacking. What this macro does is cast your interrupt at your focus target without even changing targets. So we're attacking, then we hit our keybind that has the macro, and it's going to silence that target. So I didn't even change targets at all, and then you can just continue DPSing. So super useful. Macroing your cooldowns and unused trinkets together can also be a really good way to just save keybinds and also increase your damage. So this Mind Spike macro I have here is going to use our 10th slot, which is my gloves, and that has my Synopsis springs on it. So that means before I cast Mind Spike, it's going to be like 0.1 milliseconds or whatever it is. It's going to use this, and then it's going to cast Mind Spike. So that means that I'm going to get the empowered Mind Spike with whatever buff you have macroed in, and I just have it set to my Mind Spike and Mind Blast, so I basically have this on cooldown all the time, and I don't have to use it as a keybind or anything like that. So that just looks like this. So I'll cast Mind Spike, see, and I have my buffs right here, so I got it rolling. And then the same thing would be to happen if I cast my Mind Blast as well. And the last one I want to talk about is just a at cursor macro. So our angelic feathers we have to place on the ground, and normally if you don't have a macro for this, you have to say it's on shift 1, so you have to press shift 1 and then you have to click where you want to place it. All you have to do is just press the keybind that you have it on, and it's going to immediately cast at your cursor. So see that? I didn't have to click or not anything like that. All I did was hit my keybind. So you can just do it instantly instead of shift 1, click, then run. Just put it right on the keybind and then put your cursor right wherever you want to place it, and then send it.
I'm fast as fuck, boy!
So Halo can be used to actually trigger our Twist of Fate buff from healing allies. So if you're on a fight and you know that somebody is below 35% health, or you're looking at the raid frames and you know somebody's about to get chunked, one of the tanks, something like that, you can time it so your Halo hits them or heals them, and then it will actually trigger your Twist of Fate. And then Halo range. So this one is kind of tricky. I don't have an add-on or like frames that tell me how far the target is. I honestly just kind of have it in muscle memory, but you always want to try to hit your targets at the maximum Halo range. Snapshotting. So the way snapshotting works is whatever buffs are active on your character at the time you cast that dot will take benefit for the whole duration of whatever buffs are on your character. Snapshotting can be kind of tricky because it can actually end up losing you DPS if you're trying to snapshot every little tiny buff you get. So I'm going to try to make it kind of simple for you. What I do is I always snapshot Twist of Fate. So if you have an ad, for example, that you just brought below 35% and your Twist of Fate procs, I would always snapshot my dots on all the other current targets that I have. As well as the Relic of Yu'lon is a huge intellect increase. It's like 3,000 something. So I would always snapshot that trinket. But other than that, I'm not really snapshotting like every little crit buff I get, or like Lightweave Embroidery, for example. If I see that come up and my dots still have like over 10 seconds, I'm not going to snapshot them. Because in my opinion, it's not worth it to waste the two global cooldowns when you're going to have to refresh your dots in 7 seconds anyway, so you're most likely still going to have that buff. And when you're snapshotting big buffs, always make sure you do it at the start of the buff that you get and at the end. That way you're going to get like a shitload more uptime with those buff dots. But say you get like your Synopsis Spring up, your Lightweave Embroidery procs, and then also you get your crit trinket buff. At that point, that is something that I would snapshot. So don't think of it like, oh, I only have the crit and light weave buff, I'm not going to snapshot. If you have like 3 smaller buffs all combined at once, then it will be worth it to snapshot that. I'm just going to call this Shadow Word Death sniping and Twist of Fate sniping. So what I mean by this is if you have, for example, like you're in a raid and you're focusing the boss, but you have an add up that you're cleaving maybe or something like that, you always are going to want to proc your Twist of Fate off of that target as much as you can to try to keep more uptime. And same with Shadow Word Death. So Shadow Word Death obviously grants you a Shadow Orb. So if Shadow Word Death is what you need to hit like on the priority list, for sure snipe it on like a different target. This happens a lot in AoE scenarios because you're usually mind searing off the higher health target. So lots of times like a different target will go below 35% or 20%, and then you can just snipe them and get an extra orb or proc your Twist of Fate a little bit early. Timing your global cooldowns perfectly. So what I mean by this is if you need to refresh your dots and your Mind Blast is going to come off cooldown in 1 second, if you refresh your dots at that time, you're going to lose like around a second of uptime on your Mind Blast. So timing your global cooldowns so that when Mind Blast, Shadow Word Death, etc. come off cooldown, you're not wasting any time of that ability sitting off cooldown and not being used, because that'll result in overall less devouring plagues because you're going to be generating less orbs. So in the scenario where you're refreshing your dots, the idea would be to just refresh them a second or two early, so that way as soon as you refresh them, Mind Blast comes off cooldown perfectly. Another thing that you can do is you can actually extend your channeling abilities, like if you have a trinket proc or some sort of buff. So for example, if you're, I don't know, AoEing a whole bunch of targets and they're gonna be alive for another 15 seconds and you have a super strong trinket procced, as soon as that trinket is about to fall off, you can refresh your Mind Seer, and then you're going to get a whole nother channel with that buff of whatever ability you're casting. So you can use this with Mind Seer, Mind Flay Insanity. So it's essentially snapshotting for channeled abilities, but I feel like it's worth mentioning. I'm not really sure if this is considered advanced, but in my opinion, if you're playing a Shadow Priest, you should have the mindset of an off healer kind of. So you should be able to play a healing spec at least a basic level. If you can do this, it's going to give you a much deeper level of understanding of how to use your cooldowns efficiently, how to use your defensives properly, and on top of that, just like an understanding of how the whole class works. A good Shadow Priest isn't a Shadow Priest that is always top damage. Of course, that's part of it. You don't want to be parsing gray or green on every single fight, but a good Shadow Priest utilizes all their cooldowns to help the raid as well as doing good damage. So my mindset going into fights is like I'm always looking around at what I can help with. So for example, like I'm using Life Grip a lot if I see, like I'm just observing one of the DPS or one of the healers is out of position, and I'll literally utilize this like not on cooldown, but at least once a fight or something, just to try to help like for positioning and stuff. Void Shift is another example that can literally make or break a boss kill. That's going to be it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any other tips or tricks, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.